I will master my emotions. If I am sad, I will laugh. If I feel fear, I will plunge ahead. If I feel poverty, I will think of wealth to come. It was a sign of weakness to show emotion, or to be too happy or too sad. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories. Okay, hi, hello. Welcome to the Extraordinary Stories podcast with me, Barry Henderson. This podcast is a place where you will hear some of the craziest stories you have ever heard. Hello if you're new to the podcast, and welcome if you're not. This is episode 4, so if you haven't listened to episode 1 to 3, perhaps now's the time to go back and give those episodes a go. With each episode, I'll be taking you through a new story, be it true crime, extreme survival, stories of tangled webs of deceit, sometimes just the outright weird. We're talking murder, wrongful convictions, secrets unearthed, and all that lies in between. Those stories that you just find so delicious and you just want to share them with other people. Today's story is a well covered and well reported one, but it's one that I have loved since I very first heard of it. And I started to watch lots of documentaries about it, and I started to read lots and lots about it. So I definitely felt like I needed to bring it to the podcast. It's the story of Eric and Lyle Menendez. I'll start by saying that I think these are a horrible pair of human beings, and they deserve everything that happened to them. And although this phrase gets way overused, in the case of these brothers, it's said that their trial was as big as the OJ trial. I think that's true. It was described as a spectacle. Okay, let's go. We'll start the story with Jose Menendez and his arrival in America from Cuba. He arrived to America speaking no English and was unskilled. Jose would go on to follow the American dream and become a multi-millionaire years later, living in Beverly Hills. In Cuba, he was known for being a bit of a bully and being driven by his very male persona. So, whatever that really means, without going off topic, it's one of the things that drives me most insane, is men who end up trapped in this idea of masculinity. And the trap that often involves having to be tough, being very aggressive to get what you want in life. And I see this every day in life, and I'm sure that anyone listening, I'm sure you see it too. Men who are so constrained by the identity given to them that you must be a man. A man acts like this and a man speaks like this. And I know there's absolutely seismic changes going on in the world to do with gender identity. And I welcome that 100%. But it still exists, and it will for a long, long time. That both men and women will be shackled to an idea of what it is that their gender represents. Okay, so that ends my rant about gender, but I hope that gives you a clear idea of Jose at this point. He was a Cuban man who arrived in America and very much felt like a man who was who had to be powerful. He had to be strong. He had to act like a man to make his way in the world. Jose's fortune was made through the record companies he came to own and a film production company. His record company actually signed some huge artists, including the Eurythmics. It said that he did this with a ferocious drive. He met and he married a woman named Kitty at Southern Illinois University, who was the mother to their two sons, Eric and Lyle. Kitty is described as stunningly beautiful. They married and they moved to New York. Now, all the way through their marriage, Jose was a very sexual being. He was having plenty of marital affairs, even from the early stages of the marriage with Kitty. He was fucking about behind Kitty's back, and unfortunately Kitty knew about this. Or fortunately, maybe, that she knew about this. Kitty confronted one of the women Jose had been having an affair with and asked if it was all over yet. And the woman that Jose had been having an affair with said yes, it was finished. But actually, this wasn't true. He was still having an affair with this other woman, and this carried on for years and years. Now, when I say Kitty confronted, I don't want to give you the impression that she was a particularly aggressive woman. I just think she was someone who was suffering from many, many years of her husband cheating on her. Jose was known as a tough boss, and employees feared him. Now, the relationship he had with his two sons was a fierce one. He pushed his sons to explore solitary sports rather than group sports like soccer or basketball. He wanted them to succeed in a sport that was a solitary endeavour, always encouraging them to be individual winners in life. His sister-in-law says of Jose, he was a man who expected perfection, but he never got it. I think Jose was coming at life from a point where he'd built a fortune from nowhere. You know, he arrived in America, as I said, unskilled, unable to speak the language, and through just sheer hard work, and yes, perhaps being a bully, perhaps being very tenacious, he had gotten somewhere. He'd started to make money, he'd met his wife, he'd had his two sons, and he was earning money. And I think for Jose that was a good thing. That was really up there for Jose. That was the dream. He was living the dream at that point. And this, I think, is what he expected of his children. Now, Kitty. Not a lot is known about Kitty, aside from the fact that she was, by Beverly Hills standards, described as a little bit of a mess. Often her hair wasn't brushed, she wore sports clothing to go about in, and she wasn't very well presented. I don't think Kitty worked while the boys were young or when they became teenagers. I couldn't find a lot of evidence to confirm that. I know that previously she had been a school teacher, and also that at one point she wanted to be an actress, but that Jose had said to her that she needed to look after the boys and not spend her time pursuing her own desires in life. Okay, let's get to the brothers, Eric and Lyle. Lyle was the older brother by 2 years, with Eric then being the youngest. As children, they were described as spoiled and the kind of boys who did what they wanted when they wanted. Years later, the boys would be diagnosed with both having narcissistic personality disorder. So a few things on this. I'm just going to give you a couple of the symptoms of someone who has narcissistic personality disorder. These will become very important later on in the story of Eric and Lyle. 1. Grandiosity with expectations of superior treatment from others. 2. A fixation on fantasies of power, success, intelligence, and attractiveness. 3. Self-perception of being unique, superior, and associated with high status people and institutions. 4. A sense of entitlement to special treatment and to obedience from others. Now these are worth noting now because they play a huge part in the story of Eric and Lyle's life. In 1987, the family moved to California when Jose's work required him to move. So the house that they moved to is a beautiful house in Calabasas, surrounded by gates and with sprawling amounts of land. They had tennis courts in the back for the boys to practice with. Now we get mixed reports on the years growing up for Eric and Lyle. The general consensus is that the boys were not very popular due to the fact they were both very arrogant, both very pompous brothers. So not a lot of friends, but they had each other. They were good friends together. They didn't necessarily have a lot of friends outside of themselves. Both brothers had attended Princeton Day School whilst they lived in New York, and when they moved, Lyle attended Princeton University, but he was placed on academic probation for poor grades and for having to be disciplined repeatedly. He was later suspended for a year after allegations of plagiarism. However, he was a very talented tennis player. Good for him. In 1987, Eric attended high school in Calabasas, earning really average grades, but showing a remarkable talent for tennis. Okay, so now we've got two brothers, both very good at tennis. They're going to be the new Jamie and Andy Murray. A neighbour said, if you saw the Menendez brothers as teenagers, you saw spoiled rich kids spinning out of control. Eric would go into a store, and if he wasn't served immediately, he would start throwing things around from the store and yelling that he was here to buy something. Okay, so what we're getting here is a picture of two spoiled rich kids running around like a pair of dickheads, living off their dad's money and being members of exclusive clubs, thinking they're owed some kind of admiration. Now, here's my thing. I have no problem with people living a life of luxury in Beverly Hills or, in fact, anywhere if you've earned it. There's money to be earned in the world, and if you've managed to do that, then good on you. However, if you're the son or the daughter of that person, you don't deserve to be running around town like a prick, acting as if you think you're better than other people. You did fuck all to deserve this, so stop. Eric and Lyle Menendez, stop acting like a pair of fucking princes. Sorry, I realise I've gotten a little bit sweary there talking about them, but the Menendez brothers really get under my skin. When I read loads of these reports at the time about the fact that they were just running around town like these two cocky little dickheads who thought they had everything and could get whatever they wanted because their dad was so rich, it makes my blood boil because the two of them just absolutely drive me insane. Okay, now that I've calmed down from that, Lyle, the elder brother, was being lined up to take over his father's empire. So the idea was that Lyle would take over Jose's business, which at this point I think was producing Hollywood films. I think he was involved in producing Rocky and possibly Jaws at this time, but big films anyway. So Jose was really in there. He was really producing some big movies at the time, so Lyle was destined to take this over. As I'd said earlier, Jose pushed the boys into solo sports, and he, as well as knowing that Lyle was going to take over the business, he encouraged them always to be working on their tennis. Now, it's said that Kitty and Jose were very concerned about the family image that was being projected, and realising that neither of their sons showed particularly good academic abilities, they would do their homework for the sons and try to ensure that they got good grades at school. Although this would then fall apart when in school they would take tests and fail them. They controlled their sons by telling them who to date. They wanted their sons to be successful tennis players and marry beautiful women. Lyle and Eric were said to have feared their father growing up. Asked to describe their relationship with their father, Eric says it was brutal, painful, torturous, and yet I admire him because he was so strong. He was everything that success was. When the boys were aged 9 and 11, Jose Menendez hired a psychologist for his sons. He asked the psychologist to sort out whatever the fuck was going on with them that was making them act crazy. Even at 9 and 11, these two boys were acting weird. And Jose thought, okay, we need a psychologist here to sort this out. But Jose, being a controlling man, he made sure that he was allowed to know everything that had been discussed in their sessions with the psychologist. Now, although the parents kept a close eye on both brothers, they couldn't be with them 24 hours a day, obviously. And in his teenage years, Eric began hanging around with a group of local kids, similar to him, similar Beverly Hills rich kids, and they would ride around in their cars, ride around the town, and they came up with a game, a really ridiculously silly game, where they would see an empty house, and the game was, could you go in and steal from that house? Pretend burglary, basically. Eric would steal something and then he would later return it. Apparently he only ever took things so that he could show off to his brother that he had taken these things from the house, but then he would always return them the next day. But it was a kind of bravado thing. It was him going, oh look, I was able to break into this Beverly Hills house last night, steal this, I don't know, piece of jewellery, but I'm going to return it, but just so you know, this is the kind of thing that I can do. I think this was just kids messing about at this point. Eric and Lyle began to play this game together, so they would ride around in these cars and they would break into houses and they would take things, and it was all fun and it was all a bit of a big laugh. One night they stole $100,000 worth of jewellery and cash from a house, and it was at this point police caught them and they were arrested. So, was this just bored rich kids looking for a challenge? I think it possibly was at this point. I don't really believe Eric or Lyle thought this was a way of life, and I don't think either of them intended to become a master criminal. I think the two of them were just showing off and being a bit dickheady at this point. I think the two of them were just I think they were just young and just being stupid. So, with the break-in, Eric and Lyle were arrested, and Jose very quickly cleaned up the mess. Jose paid the victims by cheque, and he went to the press and asked them to keep this story out of the papers, and he succeeded in doing this. So at this point, are the parents losing control of the brothers? Yeah, maybe. Both sons, it seems, are acting out quite a lot. Jose and Kitty at this point wanted to get the family away from Calabasas, so they moved now to a house in Beverly Hills. Kitty confided to her brother that she felt the boys had become uncontrollable and she didn't know what the future would hold for either of them. Lyle at this point was very much the alpha of the two brothers. He was dominant like his father, but both brothers were exceptionally close, and this is kind of because actually their common enemy was their dad. That was who caused them the most pain in their life. That was the man who constantly pushed them and pushed them and pushed them. That was the guy who set the rules, and so together they decided he was the common enemy, and that just brought them closer together. Lyle, as a 18-year-old, had lots and lots of girlfriends, some of which were models. Yeah, when you look at Lyle, I can only assume that must have been a money-related thing because, Why else a model would go out with Lyle Menendez, I'm not really sure. Slowly he was turning into a playboy. His parents tried to stop this by taking away his credit cards, but in return, what he did was he simply stole theirs straight out of their wallets, straight out of their purses, and he used them to fund his extravagant life. Eric was different in this respect. He had no girlfriends, and he was described as struggling to find his way, which it's really just a polite way of saying that his sexuality was being questioned. Was Eric gay? Probably. Some of the words that people used to describe Eric at the time were ostentatious, flamboyant, and a very large presence. Now, none of these things, and I mean that, none of those things make him gay. Of course they don't. That would just be ridiculous. But those words, they are an interesting way to describe someone. People around Eric, very much so, thought that he was possibly gay, and that also Jose and Kitty had a huge issue with this. Now, he denied being gay for years and years, over and over, and even now he still denies that he's gay. But both parents believed their son was having sex with men at this point. Eric was told by his mother to get a girlfriend or lose his allowance. He was given a deadline of 6 months to find this girlfriend, which he did, but it quickly fell apart. Now, okay, of course it fell apart. He's gay, and that makes sense. And that's okay, but not for Jose. Obviously, it's not okay. Just a small note on their allowance. Eric and Lyle received $60,000 a year in an allowance. It wasn't enough for them. They wanted more. $60,000 fucking dollars a year in an allowance. I mean, that is unbelievable. I mean, I understand that thing of if you've got money and you've just grown up with money and you think that you can just have all the money in the world, then you just want more and more and more. But at no point did they have any perspective on the fact that they were receiving in an allowance way more than fucking people's wages would be in a year at that point. I mean, it's obscene. It's just, I don't know. What the fuck were Jose and Kitty thinking, giving them that large amount of money? I understand, yeah, you're a father, Jose, who's made lots of money and you want to celebrate that by giving your kids money, but you're also turning around at the same time and saying, my two boys are a pair of fucking nightmares. They're a pair of absolute dicks who are running around acting like playboys. Well, then stop giving them the fucking allowance that you're giving them. Oh. Anyway, a note briefly here on Kitty. Jose's affairs were now at their peak, and he was seeing 2 mistresses on the side and a host of sex workers. Kitty felt that her marriage and her entire life was falling apart around her. Now, if you remember earlier on, I told you that Kitty confronted one of the mistresses as she wanted this to be all over. So she succeeded in getting rid of one of the mistresses, and really what she wanted was to try and regain a normal family. But this wasn't to be for Kitty. She could still see Jose having affairs. The 2 boys were spiralling out of control, and unfortunately she took an overdose of Valium. So Lyle describes her at this time as an alcoholic who was a broken woman beaten down by Jose. Lyle apparently was the son who was stressing the life out of her. His lifestyle was just absolutely causing her the most pain. So between the affairs and the 2 nightmare sons, Kitty's life was in a pretty bad place. Jose at this point tells his brother-in-law that he's extremely disappointed with his sons and how they've turned out, and is considering writing them out of the will. A close friend of Kitty's one day recalls being in the house while Kitty sat at the computer changing her will to write the boys out of it. When the friend said, "Now you do know that Lyle can hear you, he's just down the hall," She replied, "I don't give a damn. They know they're not getting any money from me." Years later, Lyle said there was a confrontation in the house about the money and about the wills and about being written out of them, and that it was never ever resolved. At this point, I'll mention the screenplay. Now, this becomes really important to the story later. Eric had written a screenplay with a friend, and it was called Friends. The screenplay is about two brothers who decide to kill their wealthy parents to inherit their fortune. Eric was very into acting and had won a couple of school awards for some of the shows that he had been in, and he was something of an amateur writer, so he would write plays, he would write screenplays, and so one of them involved killing of the parents to inherit their fortune. So here is where we are now. Both Eric and Lyle are out of control with money, and their parents are despairing of them. Jose and Kitty have currently written them out of their wills. What Eric and Lyle do next is unbelievable. On August 20th, 1989, the brothers enter their family home where their parents are sitting watching a film in the living room, and using two guns they had bought the week before, kill both parents. First, their father, Jose. He was shot in the head and then a further 4 times in the body. His head was almost detached from his body from the force of the first shot, but they still shot a further 4. And then Kitty. Kitty gets up, realising her 2 sons have guns, and tries to run down the hall. In this moment, Lyle turns to Eric and says, "Shoot her." And he did so. So Jose is dead, and then they hear a noise from Kitty. She wasn't dead. Lyle says, "I reloaded and I shot her close." They had to reload their guns again to kill their mother, and she was shot so many times that she became unrecognisable. They then shot both parents in the kneecaps to make the crime appear mob-related. Eric said years later, "As I went into the room, I just started firing." The interviewer asks, "And what was in front of you?" He says, "My parents." Lyle then makes the infamous 911 call, which you can hear on YouTube. It's honestly, go and listen to this because it's so terrible. He's crying and he's wailing down the phone to the operator, repeating, "Someone killed my parents." And you can hear Eric in the background shouting and Lyle telling him to stay where he is. At this time in Beverly Hills, they averaged 2 murders a year, and so it comes as a massive shock to police when it's reported. The detective who arrived described the following. "It was eerily quiet. I walked into the family room and the TV was still on. Kitty had been wearing white, but it was now blood-soaked. Jose had a gunshot wound through the back of his head. Blood was everywhere. Brain matter on the ceiling. It was really horrendous." The Menendez estate at the point when Jose and Kitty were killed was worth $14 million. Now, things could have been done differently immediately after the crime, but unfortunately they weren't. The guns used to kill Kitty and Jose were actually still in the brothers' cars. The brothers still had residue on their hands. But at this point, none of these things were checked. I think the idea was, at this time, from a lot of the reading I've done, is that we're in Beverly Hills. There's no way that this couldn't have been a mob hit. Murders don't happen here. There's just no way that it couldn't possibly have been 2, 3, 4, 5 outsiders who came into this house and committed this crime. And the brothers were treated as victims. They said that they had come home from the movies and found them dead. Now the news hit TV pretty quickly, and soon everyone was seeing the footage of Jose and Kitty Menendez's dead bodies being brought out of their house. Now the mob theory, it worked well for a while. TV and newspapers reported the murders as mob hits and that Kitty and Jose had been gunned down by mobsters. So this flew for a while. This was really the popular belief. This is how they died. This is what this is. Police quickly jumped onto this. They jumped on the organised hit angle and tried to find the connections about why this would have happened, who did Jose know, why has this come to be. But they couldn't find any evidence. Not a single bit of evidence or a trail towards the mob to support the theory that that's how they had died. So the attention turned quickly to Eric and Lyle. Eric, the day after the murders, had gone looking for legal action. He was described as a mess, and it's believed at this point that he confessed to a friend. A friend who was trying to offer support was with Eric in one of the days following the murders, when Eric turned to him and said, "So do you want to know what happened?" The friend said, "Yes." Then Eric described the murders in full detail. The friend, he knew he had been burdened by something, but he kept this to himself. 5 weeks after the deaths, they each received $400,000 insurance payout. And by God, did they go spending. So, Lyle bought himself an expensive Rolex watch, a Porsche. He at this point actually bought a restaurant as well called, Chuck's Spring Street Cafe, a Buffalo Wings restaurant in Princeton. Eric hired himself a full-time tennis coach, and he went on to compete in a tournament in Israel. All of this during the time when the parents are dead, but they are running around buying themselves expensive things, living the fucking life of luxury. Oh, what a pair of dicks. The lavish life that they were leading, and seemingly quite unaffected by their parents' death. Neither of them actually seemed to be too particularly fussed by the fact that their parents had been killed in this supposed mob hit in their house. All of this would lead police to believe, yeah, okay, the two of you are definitely guilty. Eric would confess the crimes again, but this time with his psychiatrist, Dr. Oziel. He described the entire crime in detail, and this became the catalyst for their arrest. So Dr. Oziel, having first heard the confession from Eric, then thought, I need to tape the subsequent conversations that we are going to have in my office. So I'm going to set a little tape recorder, and he said to his secretary that these conversations were going on. Now, it was his secretary who then took the tapes straight to the police. Police heard the tapes, and as soon as they did, both brothers were arrested. And now the trial begins in 1993. It was, as I said earlier on, a spectacle. This story was huge, and the media covered every moment of it. The trial was televised and was pretty soon a major talking point for everybody everywhere. The trial of the two Beverly Hills rich kids who'd killed their parents was about to explode. The brothers had hired Leslie Abraham, one of the most unpleasant people you could ever meet. So say those who knew her and were familiar to work with her. It's okay, I work with a fairly few unpleasant people. I know what that's like. It said she was ferocious. She was a fire. The prosecution were told, watch out for her. She will lie, cheat, and steal to win her case. Okay, in this case, you've really got to give it to Leslie Abraham, who played this as best she could. I mean, albeit in the most cold, calculated, terrible way that she could. She brought Eric and Lyle into the court, both wearing pastel-coloured jumpers, which only gave the impression that they were young and wholesome and very innocent. There is a piece of footage which I've watched repeatedly and it drives me insane. It's the moment when she brings them into court for the first time and she's laughing with them. She's touching them affectionately. She sort of hits one of them on the shoulder. Oh, like they've said something really funny, and oh, they're all laughing. They're all smiling, all giggling. It's as if she's trying to be mother-like. Now, it's purely for fucking effect. It's purely to be like, oh, I'm looking after these two sweet, innocent boys. They've had such an ordeal and you're about to hear about it. Oh, I'm just, it's actually vile. Go and watch it. It's on YouTube. You can find it. Go and watch Leslie bringing them into the court. It's actually fucking vile. It's horrible. In her opening statements, she said, there is no doubt who killed Kitty and Jose Menendez. But why these killings happened is what all of our evidence will focus on. Now, the prosecution were fairly certain of their approach: two spoiled rich boys who killed their parents in order to get their inheritance. Correct. They'd been written out the wills and they were pissed off. But with their parents dead, they would receive the life insurance and the assets, enough to set them up for life and allow them to continue living the life they'd become accustomed to. So, looks fairly straightforward. Here we have two boys. It's all about the money. Killed the parents. Let's get this done and dealt with. But during the trial, the story took a few amazing twists. The major one. Lyle and Eric claimed sexual abuse had taken place throughout their lives by their father, Jose. Lyle says this occurred when he was 8, but it stopped after a short while as Jose then turned his attention towards Eric. Eric maintained that this abuse started when he was a teenager and continued until the day that both parents were killed. He describes in court some pretty graphic and pretty detailed sex acts which his father would perform on him. Some are really violent, horrible in fact. He describes how his father would make him perform oral sex on him and how he would penetrate him. He says that Jose would push pins into him all over his body until he bled. Eric says that moments before the shooting took place, his father told him, go up to your room and wait there as sex is going to happen. And he says that it's at this moment that his mind exploded and the decision to kill them was made. The brothers claimed years of bullying from both parents. According to Eric, Kitty knew everything about the sexual abuse, but she just didn't care. They claimed she was cruel and she would humiliate the boys at every opportunity that she had. So, something that comes up in court, I shouldn't laugh about this, but it is kind of funny. Something that comes up that is quite weird. No. They claimed their mother was cruel and would humiliate both boys. Something that comes up in court, and I shouldn't laugh about this, it's terrible. Lyle was unfortunately bald from the age of 14, and the parents had actually got him an incredibly expensive toupee, which he wore from the age of 14, and his brother had no idea that he was wearing a toupee. In fact, I mean, when you look at it now, you look at it and you go, it's very clear you're wearing a wig. It's very clear you're wearing a wig. But I don't think at that time, actually, you would have really thought that, because probably by 90s standards, it probably was really good. But it said that, well, no, this is, I'm laughing about this, but this is what the brothers say, and I just don't believe a word of it. But they said that Kitty used to hide the toupee around the house so that he couldn't find it before going to school, and then was too scared to leave the house. Now, there's no evidence to say that didn't happen, but oh my god, if it did, God forgive me for laughing at it, but that is one funny image of a boy running around the house trying to find his wig at 14 years old while his mum has hidden it. It's also said that, well, this is all coming from the boys. It's also said that Eric wet the bed until about the age of about 15, and that Kitty would bring the bed sheets down to the breakfast table, and she would force everyone to eat breakfast around the wet bed sheets so as to humiliate him even further. I'm sorry, at this point, it just really riles me, because I just don't fucking believe the wig story. No, he was bald, yes, that's fine, but I don't believe she hid his fucking wig from him around the house, and I don't believe that she brought the bed sheets down, because now we're talking about a monster. We're talking about monsters. This is, you know what I mean, this is all fucking court spin. This is all your defence trying to make you say these things. I do not believe for a fucking single second that any of these two things happened. Describing day-to-day life, again, this is probably bullshit, Lyle said his father would read from a book entitled The Greatest Salesman in the World. That was the theme. The kids weren't trained in the same way that I was, so says Lyle. They didn't have the bloodline that I had. I had to work harder. He said his father quizzed him at the dinner table. He'd say, "What did you think about today?" Lyle would say, "I concentrated on staying away from other kids. I concentrated on sports." All the things he wanted me to say. And he'd say, "Good, good." If I gave the wrong answer, Lyle said, he'd yank me from the table and punish me. Punishments included being thrown out of the house in winter, and he would take refuge in the doghouse where he kept a secret stash of blankets. Lyle said that his father would often say, "I don't want you to end up like your sissy brother." Balls. You're talking fucking balls. So we're back in court, and the screenplay was brought back up. It turned out that Eric had rewritten it at one point to describe exactly what happened in the Menendez living room. Now, that's evidence which is really hard for the prosecution to find their way around. In this screenplay, he actually describes him and his brother walking in to their mother and father sitting in the living room and killing them both. I mean, that's hard to get around. Let's talk about both brothers on the stand. On the stand, they are, and I hate to say it, they are fucking brilliant. Now, if you haven't watched Eric and Lyle Menendez, and I'm sure some of you will, but if you haven't seen them, go and watch their testimony. You'll find it on YouTube. It's easy to find. They act their fucking socks off. Now, I mean, it's not brilliant by acting standards. I will say that. I teach acting, and I know good acting, but it is compelling to watch them cry, and the way that they act, it's just insane. I mean, yeah, you'd have to be an idiot to believe what they're actually saying, but the fact that they hit the mark so very well. There's so many, they just cry at the right moment. They just manage to just really pull out that emotion just when it's needed. It really is a performance worth watching. Leslie Abraham, I have to say, got an incredible performance out of both brothers. She played this really well. She keeps returning to things in court, like, so she's got Lyle on the stand and she says to him, so you called the police and you lied? And he says, yes. And then she says, so you killed your parents and you thought you'd get away with this? And he says, yes. But it's a very, very clever game that she's playing at this point, because what she's doing is she's taking away all of the power from the prosecution, because by getting him to admit his crime, that's a done deal. Yes, he's admitted to killing them. Fine, let's get that out of the way. Let's get rid of the fact that yes, he's admitting that they went in there and they killed the parents. It's the superb acting about the abuse. It's the superb acting about what a tyrant Jose had been for years, that she's really coached them on. That's where they're actually hitting it all the time in court. There's a dialogue between Leslie and Eric, and it is so perfectly rehearsed. She asks a question and he does his best acting to sound distressed by the question, but it's so fucking bullshit. Just go ahead and watch it. There's not a single bit of truth about it. Okay, then it gets even crazier in court. Leslie Abraham gets the brothers to say that they truly believed Kitty and Jose were planning to kill them. She got Lyle to say on the stand that he had sat with his head in his hands on the day of the murder and believe he was going to be killed. She got them to say they had bought guns as protection. I mean, for fuck's sake, this is taking it to a whole other fucking level, your defence. This is just crazy at this point. I mean, I'll give it to her, she's spinning quite the yarn, but come on, that is so low. When you know that those two men in court have killed their parents, to say that those boys thought they were ever going to be killed by their parents it's just fucking insane. Now, I've fallen into the trap here tonight, actually, because I've watched. Now, I've fallen myself into the trap here because I've watched so many documentaries about the Menendez brothers. I've started calling them the boys, but that was actually something that Leslie Abraham started in court. She would only ever refer to them as the boys. Now, I've fallen into the trap and started calling them the boys. This was something that Leslie Abraham started. So all the way through the whole entire trial, they were referred to as the boys, therefore making them seem younger, therefore making them seem vulnerable. This is something that every single person on the defence would refer to them as. Oh, it's the boys. Oh, it's the boys. Always trying to make them seem. I just realised there that I was saying that a second ago, which makes me seem like I'm part of that, but it's not. I've just been listening to it for far too long. So the prosecution entered the crime scene photos, which are brutal. I mean, go and look at them. They are. I'll put some up on Instagram, actually. They're brutal. They are horrible. Kitty is shot beyond all recognition. They're so grim. The prosecution mounted a defence which ripped apart the brothers' sob story and just made them look like petty criminals who had taken it too far and thought they were too important to get away with this. They were asked about buying Rolexes 4 days after the parents' death. This proved very powerful, and the jury took this information very seriously. Why had the brothers gone on such a big spending spree? It came up that Jose had paid for a psychologist for the boys and had wanted to hear what had been discussed. Why? Why, the defence asked. Why was Jose afraid that they were disclosing something that he didn't want them to disclose? In describing Jose as a brutal tyrant of a father, they said he would make them repeat this phrase daily. I will master my emotions. If I am sad, I will laugh. If I feel fear, I will plunge ahead. If I feel poverty, I will think of wealth to come. it was a sign of weakness to show emotion, to be too happy or to be too sad, said Eric Menendez. The trial quickly became a circus, and comedy shows like SNL started making Menendez brothers sketches and parodies. The sweater look that I had mentioned from earlier on became something comedians really like to take the piss out of. The tears, the sweaters, the crying on the stand, all of that, they just became cartoons. They became total parodies at this point. As it went down, the abuse excuse in court was not dying down. A cousin of Eric and Lyle told the court that at 8 years old, Lyle told him his father was, and I'm quoting, massaging his dick. And this only made the excuse seem more believable. But here's the thing. The Menendez fortune was about to be taken away if the brothers were found guilty. So that 14 million, all of that money that Jose had built up, was going to just disappear if these boys, I've done it again, I've called them the boys, if these brothers were found guilty. So it makes sense to me that suddenly aunts, uncles, cousins start coming out of the woodwork with all these stories. They have money to gain from this. They were all somehow written into the will. They were all going to get something from it. But they won't get anything if these two brothers go to prison. So it makes sense to me that a cousin comes forward and says, oh yeah, that's definitely what he told me at 8 years old. The testimonies of the brothers are absolutely amazing. I know I keep going on about it, but please just go to YouTube. Just spend 10 minutes and watch them. There's an amazing moment where Lyle is testifying and describing the supposed abuse that Jose was inflicting upon him, and he starts to break down, and the court camera swings to Eric, who's crying his heart out, and it's this really, even if it's acting, and it is acting, it's just this really visceral moment. They're both crying and they both look ashamed, but it's such an electric moment. I mean, it's total bullshit, but good on Leslie Abraham, because she got this moment perfectly right, and she got this moment, and she nailed this moment. Lyle tries to, at this point, say that he was so upset by his father's abuse that he took Eric into the woods when they were both very young, and that he played with them in the same way that his father had played with him. He then looks over to Eric in the court and he says, Eric, I'm sorry. And the reaction was, this is what a real victim looks like. They're not acting. This is real. Get to fuck. It's the most manipulative thing you'll ever see. It's so bad. If you look at it now, you just go, it is terrible, terrible, terrible acting. But people were crying. People were upset for the brothers. People were beginning to believe them. Eric tried to say that Kitty was a part of the abuse and that she would bring the boys to her bed and have sex with them. When this part of the trial broke, this is when things fell apart. People started saying, for fuck's sake, you've just taken it too far. Okay, we can believe that your dad abused you. You're now trying to tell us your mum had sex with you. Now we're starting to think this is all just taking it too far. So it's time for the trial to come to an end. And the closing arguments, as the trial wound down, it came down to why. Well, we know why. But it came down to hearing from both brothers why they did it. We hear years of abuse, years of torture, a mother who was an alcoholic, and a father who was a bully. Eric says that things finally reached a head when he and Lyle discussed their sexual abuse, and that this is the point where it had to end in the family. Of course, the defence went sexual abuse for the closing arguments, But the prosecution went for the facts. Again, as I said earlier, narcissistic personalities. It shines through both of these guys. I'll just give you two from the list that I read earlier. 1. Grandiosity with expectations of superior treatment from others. 2. Self-perception of being unique, superior, and associated with higher status people and institutions. Okay, so now the jury have heard all the evidence. What do they have? Two brothers who had suffered a life of misery and had no way out? Or two spoiled dickheads who wanted the parents' money now? The first trial ended in a mistrial. The jury were deadlocked. There's a piece of footage that you can find, and at the moment that it's declared as a mistrial, you can see Eric and Lyle look at each other and laugh. It's fucking horrible. Just watching the two of them look at each other and fucking laugh. It's horrible. It just drives me insane. But they were to be tried again. This was not a satisfactory answer for anything. This did not solve anything. A mistrial only meant that one juror in there was just not quite sure. So they retried the whole thing again. But things were a little bit different. The judge decided that there was to be no mention of the family history. So certain things from their childhood were ruled out of being talked about in the second trial. In the second trial, interestingly, they had nowhere near the original amount of money that they had in the first. The second trial was quick, and on July the 2nd, 1996, Lyle and Eric Menendez were found guilty. This was in line with what most people believed to be the correct verdict. Justice had been done. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Eric said, "There are some things you can endure, but my brother being taken away, the idea that I might not see him ever again, that I can't endure. That's the last thing I can take." The brothers, who had nothing but each other and who had been through this whole experience together, were then sent to different prisons. So today, Eric and Lyle Menendez are 48 and 46. Eric married in prison, and when his wife was interviewed, she said, "He's just the most gentle man." This was a woman who had written to him in prison. They've never had sex. He says, "I can't offer her what another husband can in terms of physical love." Well, that probably suits you, Eric, because you're gay. Lyle Menendez has been married twice since being in prison, and he says in the future he would like to consider children to, and I quote, "put right what happened to him." Yeah, great, Lyle. Yeah, excellent, yeah. The brothers still have a very close bond, although they're not together every day. They have not seen each other since 1996. And so ends the story of the Menendez brothers. This is such a huge topic to discuss, so much going on. And I think that's why the fascination with it never dies. I think there's recently been a Courtney Love documentary. No, filmed, sort of film documentary called Blood Brothers. That's what I think it's called anyway. Anyway, the thoughts and the theories. Was it money? Yes. Was there abuse? Was there abuse? Now that is interesting. I wrote that there and I thought, was there abuse? And I was going to say no, but I'm not sure. I'm not saying for a single fucking second, that I think Jose was at all responsible for anything that those two dickheads stood up in court and said happened. But I think there was maybe abuse in terms of, I think there's a kind of abuse in giving your kids way too much, too early, too soon, and then expecting them to not be spoiled or not be demanding. And maybe there was a fault in the parenting along the way. I don't know. This is really difficult because I'm not a parent and I don't know. And I've never had a child and then spoiled that child. But something went wrong somewhere in the Menendez family life. Something went wrong when they were trying to raise those two boys. And whether or not Kitty and Jose actually gave them too much and then got to a point where they thought, shit, we've given them fucking way too much and now we need to try and pull it back, but we've already turned them into sort of spoiled brat boys. What the fuck do we do? I don't know. But there was something going on. I don't think for a fucking second, I don't believe for a second Jose ever touched them. I don't think that's true. That's just such fucking spin to try and basically not end up with the death penalty. That's exactly what that is. Other theories are, well, this one, I've not made my mind up about it, but it's out there, so I'll just talk about it. Were the brothers in a relationship? There's a theory that circulates a lot, which says that perhaps they were. Perhaps the two brothers were actually in a sexual relationship and that Jose knew about this relationship and that they felt that they would never be able to carry on this relationship with their father knowing, and then obviously the mother would know, and that the only way for them to be able to do this would be to get rid of the mum and dad. I don't know. It's out there. It's an idea. Is it just... Are we looking just at a family where there was just too many secrets upon secrets? And I'm not saying Jose wasn't difficult, and I'm not saying that Kitty wasn't an alcoholic, and yeah, I think they probably had problems, but I don't think killing your family is the right answer. That's a really fucked up way to deal with anything. You can't have a man as driven as Jose and not expect problems. But similarly, you can't have two sons who are brought up by fear and who live in a volatile house without expecting problems. I've got friends, and I'm sure that we all do, who have grown up in very volatile family situations. And as adults, it's made them sometimes quite confrontational, sometimes aggressive. But I always have that in the back of my head where I think, this is why you're being like this. I understand that for you in your life, you grew up in a place where shouting and screaming was just the daily thing. That's what you did as a family. That was the normal. That was normal. So yeah, so in lots of ways, yeah, I can kind of understand that. One thing that I often think is really interesting is it's always said, oh, Lyle was the dominant brother, he was the older brother, he was really dominant. I don't believe that for a second. Now, if you watch the Barbara Winters interview, and if you watch the court footage, I truly believe Eric was the leader in this situation. It's funny, I don't know why. I just look at Eric and I go, no, you are definitely in charge of this situation. I do believe that Eric was gay. I really do. I think that's actually a huge part of this story that maybe came out in court and was maybe thrown up there as an idea. I'm not saying that Eric being gay is the reason why this happened, but I'm saying it is a factor. I do think there is a factor about the fact that Eric is actually gay, and I think that Jose had such a difficult time with this, and it may have been another reason that this absolute tragedy happened. So the Menendez brothers will never be free, and I'm glad. I think that's okay. I don't really care if it comes down to, you know, he was gay, oh, the father was a bit hard on them, or whatever. There's just no excuse for walking in there and blowing apart your entire family, killing your mum and dad, killing your mum to the point where she was unfucking recognisable, killing your dad once by a shot in the back of the head and then 5 extra shots to his body. For me, it comes down only to money. That's what it comes down to. I've just said all of that a second ago. Yeah, I think they were a fucked up family, but I don't think that's any excuse for what Eric and Lyle Menendez did. Although the first trial didn't go to plan for the prosecution, I think the fact that the second trial got them sent to prison for life without parole was the right decision. Okay, that's nearly it from me, except to say that if you want to reach out to me, you can do it in the following ways. So there's a Facebook group. There's Extraordinary Stories Podcast. You'll find that on Facebook. I'm sure some of you are aware of Facebook. On Twitter, I'm at Extra Stories Pods because they like to only give you a few letters to work with. On Instagram, it's Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Or you can email me, and it's extraordinarystoriespodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you, so send me an email, send me your thoughts, send me stories. As I always say, if you know a good story that's worth sharing, then let me know. Okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.